Hey guys, Tarke here, and today I'm going to very briefly make a video talking about class identity. I will be doing a full Ascendancy review once all the Ascendancies are out. I don't want to be a clickbait YouTuber who just makes pigeonhole videos without the bigger picture. That being said, I do want to talk about GGG's new Ascendancy philosophy that they've posted here. So they say that we care about class identity. We want each Ascendancy class to feel completely different from the others so that players can connect with the identity of each class and feel tempted to try other ones out. On paper, I like this. However, I must admit I am slightly worried about this design process. The reason why this slightly worries me is, in my mind, Path of Exile was never about class identity, and you run a very dangerous line where if you pigeonhole classes too much, if people like a particular kind of build, they only ever play the same Ascendancy over and over again. And since Ascendancies are tied to classes and classes are tied to set starting positions on the skill tree, you can end up in a bit of an awkward situation where you're always in the same part of the tree, always doing the same kind of thing. A good example I use for this is Uber's PoE profile. Now, currently, if you're playing a summoner, you'll only ever play a necromancer. If you're someone who likes to mostly play summoners, then you have profiles which are just a whole lot of necromancers, right? And for some people, that's a good thing. For other people, that's a bad thing. A lot of the summoner community would kind of like more options than just necromancer, and I'm a little bit worried that this new kind of focusing will lead to much more of the same, where you're only ever playing the same thing over and over and over again. Now, I'll talk about a few different things, but before I go into that, I want to quickly talk about the new player fallacy. So when I first mentioned this in chat, a lot of people saying, well, no, Tarke, this is really good because this is really good for new players. Because now, when Ascendancies are so obvious, like what their strengths are, then new players have a much easier time when it comes to making characters. Now, if that's the case, I feel like they should update the character creation screen, because a brand new player who knows nothing about the game, when they make a new character, doesn't even know what an Ascendancy is. They just kind of go, oh, I want to play a guy with a big hammer, so I guess I'll pick this guy and listen to some roleplay. And that's kind of that. There's no idea of Ascendancy, and the whole thing of class identity never really existed in PoE before, and if you want to start focusing around class identity, then you're kind of making MMO aspects of the game. Now, an example of what the character creation should then probably look like is kind of something like this. If you want class identity to be a thing, then you kind of have to put some class identity into your character creation screen. So it's kind of like, oh, you want to play a marauder? Here's the different examples. Here's some like sample skills. Again, I find this all a little bit iffy, but that's kind of, if that's the direction you want, update your character creation screen. But I think the whole completely new player thing doesn't actually benefit from that. Now, I also think that there is a slight issue, and I've spoken a lot about threshold jewels in the past. Threshold jewels force players into certain parts of the skill tree. So a lot of jewels require X many stats in radius. So if, for example, you ever want to play ethereal knives and you're in quiz, most people do inquis ethereal knives now, you can't actually play ethereal knives until you've actually finished most of your build and you're over here. That isn't very new player friendly, and having builds being forced in certain parts of the tree kind of goes against the whole Ascendancy thing. If you're in this situation with the new revamps where you want to play a skill which forces you to be in this bit of the tree, but the best Ascendancy for it is now over here, well then all of your builds have to awkwardly travel. Having to awkwardly travel is never that great of a thing. And it makes builds kind of inefficient, and it means that the same builds are doing the same kinds of defense and the same kind of offense over and over again. Be it crit, be it Ellie overload, etc. So, you know, an example of Tarke, you know, the build's always been like this. The Necro problem, it's always been like that. Well, here are a few, like, examples going way back and modern day of you actually have quite a lot of choices within class identity. So the oldest example is the Kriparian Freeze Pulse Marauder vs. Shadow. So this is before Ascendancy, way back in the Wild West of PoE, before Ascendancy's ever existed. Your starting point on the tree was mostly irrelevant, and a lot of it had to do with early versus late game strengths. So using the famous Crypt Freeze Pulse character as an example, the reason why he went as a Marauder is he wanted lots of early defense for hardcore, which felt good, but you could do the exact same build as a Shadow and start Shadow for more early damage, and that was kind of the trade-off. It was mostly picking how strong you wanted your early versus your late game to be. Now, a more recent example would be Elementalist versus Inquisitor, back when Val Fireball was a big thing. Cute Dog has spoken about this on Bay Class before, so this is why I use this as an example. But there was a big debate back when Ignite Prolif was a thing of what's actually better for Val Fireball. Do you want to be an Inquisitor and benefit from faster shield charge with faster mapping? Or do you want to be an Elementalist and the free Prolif would actually give you faster mob clear, faster mapping when it came to stuff like Beyond? And it actually became this very big debate. And there was a big, do you want to play this or do you want to play that? Currently, any Raider versus Pathfinder, you have people who are try-hard, it's Pathfinder, no, it's try-hard, it's Raider. There are quite a few examples these days of, do I want to play this, or do I want to play this? Do I want to play a Gladiator, or do I want to play a Slayer? Obviously, when one thing becomes far too powerful, it shifts it, but the more you specialize builds, the further you walk away from the choices and the options. Another example would be something like Chieftain versus Berserker for Ancestral Warchief, where you have like the hardcore versus the softcore kind of thing. Do you want to have more damage? Do you want to have more defense? Do you spend more time in lab, in which case you'd rather, maybe do Chieftain? Do you spend more time mapping? Would you rather do this? There's quite a few examples there. Again, bows being stuck into certain parts of the tree. If you're then stuck in certain parts of the tree because all of your nodes happen to be there and then your best ascendancies happen to be there, then you just play the same thing over and over and over and over again. You do sometimes get people such as myself playing like Elite Overload style bow builds, but it's very inefficient. You have the option if you would like to, but generally having very strong class identity is a little bit spoopy in my opinion. Even in a very niche example like traps, people say, well, if you want to play a trap build, you only ever play Saboteur. Well, Saboteur isn't actually that good for traps. You can do Inquis traps perfectly fine, and Inquis traps actually has smoother mapping than Saboteur traps because of the stuff like attack speed. So, yeah. People also say, but Tarke, it makes the balancing easier. The more specialized the ascendancies are, the easier it is for GG to balance. Easy balance doesn't make something good. And also, that only works if we then have perfect balance. Now, again, I'm not trying to step on anyone's parade or ruin, anyone's fun. I'm just saying that, this initial very class identity heavy focus has me slightly worried. When it comes to one other final point, just about raw power level, the fact that we are gaining so much power is also, a little bit spoopy. The top 10 Marauder in Mayhem wasn't even ascended. Ascendancy isn't really needed, to be honest, at the moment. Hopefully we do see some, monsters becoming more powerful, some more meaningful challenge being added to the game. But it is very fun, having these new things. But there's a big difference between something being very fun in the short term versus something being very fun in the long term. And again, it's not about ruining anyone's fun. It's just about trying to think about things a year from now rather than a league from now. So, yeah. Going into one other final thing that I just want to talk about, since someone brought up a pretty good example of Magic the Gathering, and I know that the development team are very big Magic fans. People say stuff like, well, how do you balance things in Magic? Well, in the case of, Ascendants being overly specialized, and there will always be the option of doing something different. Should Hierophant be the best spell totem build? And also, in the case of spell totems being too powerful, how exactly would you balance that? Do you nerf spells and totems themselves in which case any non-Hierophant spell totem build, which is always at a slight disadvantage by not being the most optimal pick, gets nerfed. Do you nerf Hierophant itself? Should, for example, Saboteur always be the de facto best trap specialization just because it is the trap-centric Ascendancy? It kind of actually makes the balancing thing even more difficult, because then you have to question, well, do we just nerf the raw gem itself? Do we then nerf it on the tree? Do we then nerf its gear scaling options? Do we then nerf its Ascendancy options? How do we balance? Do we balance around Uberlab, everyone having Uberlab? Well, the vast majority of players don't even reach certain levels of maps, so then does the vast majority of players even have a fully decked out Uberlab character? Does this actually make it more easy or more difficult for a new player or a more experienced player? I know Rise QT's thought process was this actually punishes new players more, because new players won't have the game knowledge to, fully incorporate the overly specialization. Whereas someone with more game knowledge, they might have more advantage, therefore they are in a situation where they have an even larger gulf. It's all very difficult, right? So it actually opens up an even larger can of worms. But yes, it is very interesting, and I am very excited and very much looking forward to seeing the new Ascendancies, and this is a very iterative process, and this is obviously all subject to change. GGG can change all of this at any point, but personally, I am not a big fan about specialized Ascendancies, because in my mind, Path of Exile was never about class identity. I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Bye-bye.